light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my good friend David Slater, who is a spiritual counselor and intuitive. And the topic we wanted to address today is what we decided to call the two sides of wanting. Most things, it seems, do have two sides, a light side and a dark side, as we say. But I don't want to get into demonizing darkness per se, but metaphorically it refers to the more challenging, less comfortable, sometimes more destructive potential of something.
What gets interesting as far as wanting in that direction is so many people confuse needs, wants, and desires. And they'll say...
And of course, there's no agreement on what constitutes a need.
True, but when we need the latest Nike thing, that's a little easier to understand. It's not quite exactly a need, but
there may be people who need attention because they've been too neglected and ignored in their life.
Correct.
It's an emotional need, and I'm sure there's a lot of people. Well, I'm sure you've heard lots of people say, "Oh, he just wants attention."
Mm-hmm.
Part of me at some point started saying, "Well, if he would go to that extreme to get it, why don't you give him some?"
Right. Well, what are you out when you give attention? You haven't lost anything. So, right.
People need to be nurtured.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't give them enough attention, it's the same as if you neglect your houseplants.
Uh-huh.
You have to give them enough attention to thrive, but not so much that you smother them.
Right.
But if you don't give them enough attention, they get they get covered with dust, they get totally out misshapen, the pot may go dry and they may die of thirst, any number of things.
Right.
A lot of those metaphorically apply to people.
Oh, absolutely. And with want, what we find oftentimes is that once we put it in the category of want, first of all, that's fantastic, but we will start attaching things to what this want is. This will bring me happiness, this will bring me fulfillment, this will bring me... what it's going to bring you is that thing and that occurrence, that whatever you're labeling as the want.
Well, I think sometimes it can bring you the immaterial stuff as well, though.
Yes.
Because when we embrace something as a symbol of something important, the photograph on your dresser of your grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
On one level, it's just a picture. On another level, it's the presence of your ancestors. It's the presence of your roots. It's the presence of a lineage, a heritage, a familial connection.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to think about what the object means to you. It may not have meaning to anyone else, but what does it mean to you? And how is that empowering your life?
Mm-hmm.
There have been a few times in my life where, because of moves or whatever, I had lots of things in storage. And it surprised me a little bit to notice when I was able to get those things out of storage and hang my pictures on the walls again and have my own dishes in the cupboard. And it seemed, am I being materialistic? I don't think so, but it was, because it really wasn't about the materiality of the thing. It was about it being part of my world.
Mm-hmm.
And that I actually found that I was a much stronger, much more stable person with those things there.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I was attached to materiality, but because it created a sense of home for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas while all my stuff was in storage, I felt like I was stuck in a motel without a real life.
Right. It didn't matter which dishes were there, but that dishes were there.
The fact that they were mine.
Right. But
I'm not living off of paper plates. I'm not living off of borrowed things. I'm living within my own home.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was a rented apartment. The fact that it was my pictures and my furniture and my whatever, it was like, this is me.
Mm-hmm.
This is a reflection of my sense of style and my sense of comfort and what I like and what I don't like. Even down to whether you generally keep the room brightly lit or dimly lit.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I prefer my house to be dimly lit in the evenings. There's something very calming about being in low light levels instead of being in glaringly bright levels. I visited other people who seem to have every light in the house turned on in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
It's so bright. To me, it almost seems wasteful, but it's an individual thing.
Well, what's interesting is that when you can achieve a self-love, because in a sense that's the core of what you're talking about, honoring yourself, no matter whether it's paper plates or the solid plates, but at the same time, when you get that thing that you've wanted, again, it's not that it improves who you are. It gives you an ease of who you are, vastly
different. A sort
different.
of validation.
Yes, exactly.
And I have to consider that perhaps in my case, one of the biggest reasons I feel that way is because I grew up in a household where I never really had my own sense of space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was always a vacuum where there should have been some place to call mine.
Mm-hmm.
I shared a bedroom with a younger brother till I was 14. Even after that, when we moved to a larger, older house, I had my own room, but the minute I went off to college, my mother would immediately appropriate my room to use for her sewing room or whatever, and so I've learned very quickly that anything I valued should not be left in that room because people wouldn't respect it when I wasn't there.
Right.
It would be moved, it would be put into a box. If they wanted to get rid of it, they would.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what I would come back to. There was no sense of permanence, no groundedness, no rootedness to a sense of home.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like all of my life I was in somebody else's hotel.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the two sides, when we're talking about the two sides of want, having experienced both sides in a sense, then you get to choose, and you wind up making a whole lot more sides if you wish, but basically you can find what honors you best. And then...
Well, and the flip side of that for me is that I don't want to own more than I can manage.
Right.
And people say the more times you move, the less stuff you have.
Right.
Because each time you're faced with what really matters to me.
Uh-huh.
What are the things that I value? What are the things that actually make me feel at home? And it's an emotional, psychological perception. I understand that. It still has a real effect on my ability to cope with challenges.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And when I have a sense of home, I can cope with challenges that I would absolutely not be able to deal with in other circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Right. My favorite process in moving is, do I want it? Well, sure I want it. Do I want to move it? I don't want it that bad. And
some people talk about storing things.
Oh, yeah.
And then it becomes a question of, well, how much would it cost to replace it?
Yeah.
How much will it cost to store it in the meantime?
Yes.
Okay, if it's going to cost $100 to store it, but it'll only cost $10 to buy a new one.
Right.
What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. And how much emotional content do you have to that can opener? That type of a thing. But
on the flip side, we also have family heirlooms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have the trunk that my grandfather used to emigrate from Switzerland in 1927.
Nice.
It's a story. It's a connection across time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a trunk.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, going back to our subject, it's sometimes what we want is what we need, and sometimes what we want, I think, is what promises within our mind to deliver something that it ultimately doesn't deliver.
when we believe what we want will make us more, externally, something making us grander internally.
I'll be a special person if I have this.
Exactly.
No, you're already special.
Exactly. But when you find that one thing triggers another, this is exactly how the body works. We were talking about this earlier, the body chemistry thing. One elevates, which affects another, which affects another. And when we find that, say, for instance, eating and living indoors is something you've grown fond of, so you continue to do it. But then on that, then you expand, and you don't need the latest, greatest, or whatever Madison Avenue's dishing out. What you need is want is that thing that eases life and brings more of you out instead of something on the outside bringing you forward. It just sets a stage, in a sense, for you to be yourself.
I'm trying to remember the quote I read in a particular book. A woman from India, or a woman in India who was a disciple of Gandhi, I guess, some comment about whoever has more than they need for efficiency of work and so forth is basically a thief, meaning that they're stealing resources from somebody else.
Right.
I cannot conceive of any possible reason I would need a king-size bed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, I'm 6'2", but a queen-size bed is big enough. I don't need to take up that much of the room for a king-size bed that is too big. I mean, you get lost in it.
Right. It's hard to sleep on the whole thing.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I could spread my arms and legs as wide as I could, and just reaching toward the corners, and I still wouldn't occupy more than 2/3 of the bed at the most.
Right.
And if you've ever tried to move a king-size bed, it's like, why do we need this?
Yeah.
There's people often speak of wanting as if it's something bad. And well, you don't really need it. Well, I don't know that we can say what they need and what they don't, because that's something more internal. But on the flip side, to look at this positively also, wanting has a certain relationship to ambition, inspiration, something that you could even describe in terms of joy, of reaching forward, which is where, with my fondness for symbols, I come back to that. There was, briefly, when I was about 10 years old, I was collecting plastic models of dinosaurs. And they had, all the different 8 or 9 different models, and of course you'd get this one and try to get that one, and you know which ones are in the collection because they've got the picture on the box. And there was one occasion where suddenly there on the shelf was the woolly mammoth, the biggest, most impressive, the top of the line of the whole collection, and it cost $10, which at the time was a lot of money, but it wasn't totally inconceivable. I begged and pleaded and cried and everything, and my mother decided that it was more important that I learned that I couldn't have everything I wanted. Because she had no respect whatsoever for what it meant to me. That this was a symbol of accomplishment, that this was a symbol of reaching the peak of the experience. It was as if she was consigning me to mediocrity. And that was a very heart-wrenching thing for me to have something that symbolized true accomplishment to me, and to be told you can't have true accomplishment. Which is why, fast forward 30 years later, I decided it was time to put that bad memory to rest. and I went on the internet, and lo and behold, somebody had one of these models for sale on eBay
Mm-hmm.
in the original box, shrink wrapped and everything.
Wow.
And so I now have my woolly mammoth model finally,
Uh-huh.
and it sits on the shelf. And every time I look at it, to me, it's a reminder to always reach for excellence, no matter how long you have to wait,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how hard you have to work. And and it never occurred to me that after 30 years, it actually would find its way back to me.
And one thing that can be delightful in that, I see repeatedly folks in their life, what they'll do is something must be a certain way, or it cannot be another way.
Okay.
And they will invest so much energy going out of themselves to create or keep from creating one or the other, that they retain none of it for themselves. But when they can remove the concept of time, like you did with the woolly mammoth, and also understand that anything that they are going towards, it's not a destination. In other words, say...
Well, the thing that creates value for me is if it relates to self-development.
Uh-huh. Well, for instance...
it's not about the owning, it's not about the having,
Mm-hmm.
it's about the becoming.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the delightful thing when you look at things in that direction. For instance, talking about an upgrade of equipment here. And so you're thinking, well, FM mics would be really nice, that type of a thing. So you go in that direction, and you wind up with something that's state-of-the-art, top of the line, everything you
When I win
needed.
the lottery, I'm going to buy a warehouse and set up a real studio and so forth.
But the idea, again, it's the direction. You don't know where you're going to wind up, and whereas you set the want of, okay, I want FM mics, which turns into the warehouse, which turns into, because you went in that direction. Again, it stops being the expectation, it stops being the item, it stops being a destination. It becomes, well, if this, then what? What if? And see where everything can expand.
Yeah, which again brings us back to the point of it's not about the having, it's about the becoming.
Exactly.
It's about the, for lack of a better word, evolution of life.
Mm-hmm. Taking it to the elements of life, of fear or love. Fear is all about the limits. Love is all about expansion, being that infinite, eternal thing. And we find ourselves in a loving state of being when we're looking at all the possibilities and allowing for everything that we don't see that are also possibilities, because even improbabilities become possibilities. So this takes want. And
Well, it's when the impossible becomes probable because of the ambition, the vision, the inspiration that the person is carrying. Something to the effect of, if you want it to happen, just tell somebody it's impossible.
Right, exactly.
And it will happen. They will not rest until they make it happen.
Oh yeah, my little brother did that to me all the time. I had some idea of moving a giant rock. You know, he and I spent a lot of our time in the mountains here in Colorado, and he'd get this idea, or we would get this idea of moving this rock. Well, as soon as the idea happened, I'm trying to move the rock, and then he would say, "Oh no, there's no way we can do it." And he's like, "Oh shoot!" And then about 20 minutes later, "Oh, absolutely, it can move," and wow, look at the time, and he would try to do the reverse psychology. Tell me it can't be done, and hell or high water, it's going to happen. And yeah, that's a delightful thing about the psychology of a human being, to be able to.
Well, and I used to say when I was a kid, if you stare at anything long enough, you'll figure out how it works.
Yes.
Because you begin to see the pieces and the parts and what relates to what. I had a Toyota pickup, and the emergency brake locked and wouldn't release. And, we backed up, and it locked and wouldn't release, and so we're blocking all the traffic. Can't get the truck to move at all. Called the tow truck, and this one guy wanted to get out, and I just said, well, I don't know what to do, and because the emergency brake is totally locked. Well, the emergency brake goes to the back wheels. the engine and all the weight is on the front wheels.
Mm-hmm.
What I finally ultimately managed to do, and was I Superman? I don't think so, but yes, I've been an occasional bodybuilder. But basically, I went to the back bumper and put my back against the tailgate,
Mm-hmm.
and I grabbed the bumper, and because your legs are the strongest part of your body for
Mm-hmm.
lifting, and so I was keeping my back totally straight and everything, and I pushed as hard as I could with my legs. I got, and I had the wheel in the truck turned,
Mm-hmm.
so that the front wheels are already in position for a turn.
Mm-hmm.
Well, basically, I didn't actually lift the back of the truck,
Right.
but I took enough weight off the tires that they would slide.
Right.
And so I began moving it 2 inches at a time until, the truck made this arc and was out of the way so the guy could get by.
Right.
And all I had was myself and a truck with the back wheels stuck in with the emergency brake. But
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get enough weight off of the tires to make it slide just enough to inch it around and get it out of the way and resolve the problem before the tow truck even got there.
Mm-hmm.
Which, coming back to the wanting thing, it's kind of goes back to the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a question of finding it and looking at what are the pieces and parts and what do they mean,
Mm-hmm.
and why are they important.
And asking what their purpose is and how possibly could it achieve that purpose helps you understand that, input, output, this is the purpose. All of a sudden, it makes a whole lot more sense. And we don't do that with life. What we do is we'll react to something. Oh, this is negative, this is positive, whatever. And we can stop and say, wait, what's trying to be achieved here? What's its purpose? And especially if you ask what its purpose is, tends to be far less judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. I see what your intent is here, or potentially what your intent is, and it changes.
Mm-hmm. I think there is a blessing, a virtue, if you will, to be found in wanting as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think we begin to metaphorically cut off our fingertips, however, when we tell ourselves that we don't need things that we want so badly, even when we don't know why. Because to me, if you want something that badly, that energy is coming from someplace.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that your subconscious mind is seeing a significance to the thing that your conscious mind hasn't quite grasped yet. And so when people say, what do you need? Sometimes it's easier to answer the question and say, well, what do you want?
Right.
The whole point is bringing something to consciousness.
Right. I've kind of been in that space recently in my life. I've trimmed things down to virtually nothing, mm-hmm. and rather a minimalist life. And folks are like, well, that's not the only way to spirituality. I'm like, this has nothing to do with spirituality. Spent some time, and I was the divorced father of 3 children, and had a good paying job, and would actually take on extra jobs because no matter what, I never had enough money. Everybody always wanted more money from me. And I took it personally as opposed to addressing it directly. But once I went empty nest, it was delightful to minimize
fewer things to manage.
Fewer things to manage, and get away from the "it's never enough" idea. Mm-hmm. My house is all of about 350 square feet. By doing that,
the thing we haven't really touched on that's still, I think, very much related to the wanting. Is how effectively you're utilizing whatever you have.
Mm-hmm. Putting more than one use to any one thing is a marvelous thing. Again, it's a great mind exercise. Okay, yes, I want this. What else can it do? And for instance, my trash can has at least 5 different uses, mm-hmm. and that type of thing. And so use is limited by your imagination. And and I see your space. There are so many things that are used for multiple different mm-hmm. Purposes, and many people don't understand that. And what they want more. They want more. They need this item, that item, this item, and this item, and they all could basically do the same thing. So,
you know, and in that, I guess, as we wind up this episode, understanding the two sides of wanting
mm-hmm.
is about understanding the broader possibilities of any particular person or thing that we encounter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You know, every single one of us has more capability and more potentiality and more undiscovered, untapped potential than we realize.
Mm-hmm. We tend to fear success as much as we fear failure, so we do neither. And speaking of the mediocrity, we're comfortable there. It has less responsibility, it's less frightening, also less exciting, which is a real shame.
Yeah.
So
I think both sides of wanting are not particularly comfortable.
Exactly.
One of them leads to greater enslavement, though, I think, where you find out that you don't own things, they own you.
Yeah, limits and expansion.
You know, but the other leads to a more powerful integration of our dreams and our realities.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
That becoming, nurturing part should always be encouraged and supported.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're more welcome.
And thank you for watching.